Across Africa, Europe, and Asia, the Middle Ages were a hotbed for political events, military action, pioneering inventions, influential literature, and, of course, religious turmoil. Let's travel back in time and look at some of the most significant Middle Ages events from across the medieval world. And now for a quick message from our sponsor, me! Firstly, a huge thank you to everyone who listened to my band Default Mode Network's first two singles. I read and really appreciate all of the nice comments. I want to keep this brief as it really has nothing to do with medieval history, but we've just put out our third single called Run for Cover, and I'd be really grateful to anyone who checks it out. Not only is it amazing to hear everyone's thoughts on the music, but the more stream saves being put in playlists and shares we can get on the streaming platforms, the more ears the songs get pushed out to on the algorithms. So it seriously is a huge help every time you guys stream the music. This song also has an accompanying music video made by myself, which I'll link below with the streaming links. The idea behind the video was to recreate the vibe of what you'd see skipping through music channels on a Saturday morning when you're a kid. So for anyone who's a fan of bands like Queens of the Stone Age, Foo Fighters, Green Day, or generally any guitar-based music, check out the song or video in the links below. I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Thanks again everyone, and now for today's video, welcome to Medieval Madness. (523 to 524), the Consolation of Philosophy. The Roman senator, polymath, and philosopher Boethius found himself imprisoned by Theodoric the Great, king of the Ostrogoths. Charged with conspiracy after publicly defending a fellow consul for denouncing corruption in government, he wrote the Consolation while awaiting execution. In it, he discusses the problem of evil, fate, free will, and the nature of happiness. He invented the concept of the Wheel of Fortune. The treaty became one of the most popular works with statesmen, philosophers, and theologians alike during the Middle Ages, as it blended classical thinking and Christian doctrine. 525, the Anno Domini calendar. The monk Dionysius Exiguus invented the dating system Anno Domini and first used it to calculate the dates of Easter. Dionysius set the starting point at the birth of Jesus Christ, although it is thought that he miscalculated the exact date. It is used to number the days of both the Gregorian and Julian calendars. Dionysius stated it was 525 years since the incarnation of our Lord Jesus Christ. How he decided on that number is unknown. The church accepted the Anno Domini calendar, and it eventually became the principal method for dating in the West. 529 to 534, Code of Justinian. Justinian I was the Eastern Roman Byzantine emperor in Constantinople. He authorized a classification of the existing Roman laws. The results became known as the Code of Justinian. By preserving Roman legal concepts, they influenced the development of laws across the world and provided the foundations for civil laws currently used in Europe and Latin America today. The common law that developed in medieval courts consequently spread to the United States. 541 to 542, the Plague of Justinian. This plague became one of the first pandemics in recorded history. It was caused by the same bacterium responsible for the Black Death, which arrived over 800 years later. The plague was named after Emperor Justinian, who was said to have contracted the disease and recovered. The Byzantine Empire was devastated by the plague, which was killing up to 5,000 people a day in Constantinople at its peak. The pandemic is estimated to have caused 25 million deaths around the Mediterranean and Middle East. 563, St. Columba founds Iona. St. Columba was an Irish abbot. Along with 12 companions, he embarked on a journey to the island of Iona on Scotland's west coast. Once there, the men established a monastic community to spread Celtic Christianity among the pagan North and Pictish kingdoms. The foundation of the abbey on Iona marked a turning point for the growth of Christianity across northern England and Scotland. At the abbey, the monks transcribed religious texts and educated the clergy. The network of monasteries that developed from Iona produced illuminated manuscripts such as the Book of Kells. 590, Gregory the Great becomes Pope. Gregory I became the Bishop of Rome and began his Gregorian mission to convert the pagan Anglo-Saxons to Christianity 6 years later. Gregory was a prolific writer, and his works, which include dialogues, pastoral care, and several sermons, were seen as guides for bishops and the clergy. He is credited with the development of the Gregorian chant, a central tradition in medieval music. Gregory's papacy helped to improve the welfare of the Romans. He also regained papal authority across France and Spain, strengthening the role of the Catholic Church, and sent missionaries such as Augustine of Canterbury and Paulinus of York to England. He was the first pope from a monastic background and is often credited with establishing the medieval papacy. Many believe that the beginning of medieval spirituality began with Pope Gregory. 618, the Tang Dynasty begins. General Li Huan founded the Tang Dynasty by leading a successful rebellion and taking advantage of the weakened Sui Dynasty. Huan became its first emperor and used the name Gaozu. The dynasty became a golden age for art and literature. There was a flourishing of Tang poetry and advances in medicine, engineering, and cartography. Buddhism spread across East Asia and became the dominant ideology across China. It was during the Tang that the trade route known as the Silk Road was established, opening up the country to foreign influences and promoting political relationships with neighboring countries. Many historians regard the Tang as a high point in Chinese culture and a time of economic prosperity and political stability. 622, Hegira. This was the journey that the Prophet Muhammad and his followers took from Mecca to Medina, and it marks a key moment in the history of Islam. Muhammad was fleeing from persecution to establish a new community grounded in Islamic principles. The date represents the beginning of the Islamic calendar and a milestone in the rise of the religion. In Medina, Muhammad united the various tribes together under one banner to establish a political and religious community. The date remains central to the history of Islam and symbolizes a spiritual milestone as the struggle moved on to a time of growth and strength. 651, Muslim conquest of Persia. After a conflict that lasted for over 20 years, this marked the fall of the Sasanian Empire and the expansion of the Islamic Caliphate. Muslim territories were significantly extended as Persian lands were integrated into the Caliphate. This transformed Iran as new administrative systems were brought in and Islamic cultures and ideologies were incorporated and absorbed into Persian society. Future developments in the region included the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate and the flourishing of an Islamic Golden Age. 691, Buddhism receives imperial endorsement in China. The Tang Empress Wu Zetian officially recognized Buddhism as the state religion of China. The religion had been introduced to the country centuries before, but because of the support of the Empress, many Buddhist institutions, temples, and monasteries were now built. The period revitalized Buddhist teachings, and many important scriptures were translated to promote the religion. This, in turn, impacted Chinese art, politics, and philosophy, and shaped the identity of China's future. 717 to 718, the Siege of Constantinople. Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, was besieged for the second time by Muslim Arabs of the Umayyad Caliphate. After 20 years of attacks and increasing occupation of the borderlands, the Caliphate launched a significant siege against Emperor Leo III. A vigorous defense was mounted using cutting-edge fortifications, naval forces, and political alliances. The siege has been seen as one of the most important military conflicts in the Middle Ages, and its failure had widespread repercussions. It ensured the survival of the Byzantine Empire and changed the whole outlook of the Caliphate as the objective of outright conquest was brought into question. 747 to 750, the Abbasid Revolution. Also known as the Movement of the Men of the Black Raiment, this revolution saw the overthrow of the Umayyad Caliphate. The Persian general Abu Muslim led the revolutionaries who were unhappy with the ruling Umayyad amid accusations of nepotism and widespread corruption. At the Battle of the Zab in 750, the Umayyad forces were overthrown and the capital was moved in Damascus in Syria to Baghdad in Persia. This was the beginning of the Islamic Golden Age, with advances in science, mathematics, astronomy, arts, and medicine. The Abbasid period allowed trade to flourish, saw cultural exchanges, encouraged scholarly achievements, and established traditions that spread across the whole of the Islamic world. 793 Vikings Raid Lindisfarne. Viking raiders attacked the monastery of Lindisfarne, also known as Holy Island, off the northeast coast of Northumbria in England. During the attack, many monks were either killed or captured and enslaved. It sent shockwaves across Christendom. Alcuin, a Northumbrian scholar at the court of Charlemagne, wrote, quote, "Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race. The heathens poured out the blood of saints across the altar and trampled on the bodies of saints in the temple of God like dung in the streets." Worse was to come, as the attack only foreshadowed the start of further Viking invasions. By 870, the Danes were everywhere on the coasts of Francia, Ireland, and Britain, and the conquest of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had begun. 800 Charlemagne crowned. Charlemagne was crowned Roman Emperor on Christmas Day in 800 AD. Already king of the Franks, Charlemagne was a great defender of the papacy and was rewarded with the title of the first emperor in the West for 300 years by Pope Leo III. This marked a restoration of the empire's legacy and a union of Christian and secular authority. Charlemagne's reign prepared the way for the future Holy Roman Empire. He was a leading figure in the history of the medieval period. 843 The Treaty of Verdun. The Carolingian Empire was ruled by Louis the Pious, son and successor to Charlemagne. Now at its height in both territory and area, the empire was divided up into 3 territories. The recipients were Louis's sons, Charles the Bold, who was to rule West Francia, Louis the German, who was given East Francia, and Lothair I, who was given Middle Francia. This followed almost 3 years of civil war and internal wrangling. The signing of the historic treaty marked the start of the formation of Germany and France. 862 The Ruik Dynasty in Russia. Ruik was a Varangian chieftain. Traditionally, he was said to have been invited to rule over local tribes to bring stability to the region. He is considered to be the founder of the Ruik Dynasty, the ruling dynasty of Kievan Rus, the first East Slavic state. This marked the beginning of centralized rule of Kievan Rus and its principalities. The territory was expanded by his successors throughout the Middle Ages, and the influence of the dynasty proved to be part of the foundation of Russian nationalism. 910 Clooney Abbey. William I, Duke of Aquitaine, founded the Benedictine Abbey of Cluny in Burgundy, France. Its establishment singled the abbey out as a leading light in monastic practice, with an emphasis on strict piety, religious discipline, and an extreme dedication to prayer and worship. The practices at Cluny influenced other monasteries across Europe. 911 The official foundation of Normandy. The Viking leader Rollo signed the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte with Charles the Simple, king of West Francia, in an act that granted him the county of Rouen. This established the Duchy of Normandy and marked a point in European history that saw the Norsemen integrate into France. Rollo's descendants became known as the Normans, and they played an integral part in shaping the history of England, Italy, and the Byzantine Empire over the following 2 centuries. 919 Gunpowder. It's possible that gunpowder was first used in warfare at the Battle of Langshan on the Yangtze River. The Wu burned down 400 enemy ships with the aid of a flame-throwing device. The flamethrower may have used gunpowder to ignite petrol on the surface of the water. The use of gunpowder spread across China and the world, fundamentally changing the face of warfare. 979, China reunited under the Song Dynasty. After usurping the throne of the later Zhou Dynasty, Emperor Taizu of Song spent 16 years conquering the rest of China, reunifying territory that once belonged to the Tang and Han empires. The consolidation saw an era of cultural advancement and political reform embodied by economic development and technological innovations. The dynasty ruled for more than 300 years. 988, Vladimir I is baptized a Christian. Vladimir the Great was Prince of Novgorod and Grand Prince of Kiev. He consolidated the realm of Kievan Rus, preventing incursions from the Baltic tribes, Bulgarians, and Eastern nomads. Originally a follower of Slavic paganism, Vladimir converted to Christianity in 988, destroyed pagan monuments, established many churches, and brought Christianity to his people. 1025, the Canon of Medicine. Avicenna was a Persian Muslim philosopher and physician. He compiled his Encyclopedia of Medicine into 5 books. He mixed together the earlier traditions of Greco-Roman medicine, taking inspiration especially from the works of Galen, with Persian, Indian, and Chinese research. The treatise was translated into Latin in the 12th century and became a standard in European universities. Across the world, the Canon of Medicine is one of the most influential books of its time. 1043, the Kingdom of Nen began. Nen was a medieval society that is thought to have started around 1043 when Isnri Efekunim became the first priest king. The kingdom was located in what is now Nigeria, West Africa, and was a haven for slaves and outcasts. The Isnri managed diplomacy and trade with countries such as Egypt, Ethiopia, Babylon, and India. The kingdom had a significant impact on politics and religion in what is known today as Igboland, and their culture permanently influenced the northern and western Igbo. 1054, the Great Schism. This breakdown of communion between the Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox churches continues today. A series of ecclesiastical and theological differences caused the split between Patriarch Michael I Sir Eularius of Constantinople and Pope Leo IX, as each excommunicated the other. It resulted in 2 distinct branches of Christianity being formed. 1066, the Norman Conquest. The fighting reached its climax at the Battle of Hastings in this year when William of Normandy was victorious over the Anglo-Saxon King Harold and crowned King of England. This brought significant cultural, political, and social change to the country. 1077, Walk to Canossa. In what has been described as one of the most dramatic moments of the Middle Ages, the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VII made his famous walk barefoot in the snow. Henry went to beg forgiveness from Pope Gregory VII as he faced excommunication because of the investiture controversy. This was a dispute over the ability to choose and install bishops. The event symbolized the power struggle between church and state, proving that for the medievals, the church had the upper hand. 1084, Zai Tongam published. This was a chronicle published during the Northern Song Dynasty that provided a record of Chinese history from 403 BC to 959 AD. Commissioned by the emperor and compiled by his official Sima Guang, it took 19 years to complete. It covers 16 dynasties spanning almost 1400 years, consisting of 294 scrolls and totaling around 3 million Chinese characters. It still stands as one of the most ambitious works of literature and is crucial to our understanding of Chinese history. 1095, the First Crusades. At the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II called upon all Christians to support the Byzantine Empire by undertaking an armed pilgrimage to Jerusalem. This was the first in a series of religious wars to recover the Holy Land from Islamic rule. 4 years later, after a 5-week siege in which thousands of Jews, Christians, and Muslims were killed, the Christians had control of Jerusalem, marking the end of the First Crusade. Following this, 4 Crusader states were established and a presence remained in the region until the Fall of Acre in 1291. After this, there were no further significant attempts to recover the Holy Land. 1098, the Cistercians. This religious order of monks and nuns branched off from the Benedictines. The Cistercians were founded by Robert of Moulins and a group of monks determined to return to a more austere way of life. Cistercians were identified by their white cows as opposed to the black ones worn by the Benedictines. At Citeaux Abbey in Dijon, France, where the order was first established, emphasis was placed on self-sufficiency, spiritual chasteness, and contemplation. This marked the start of monastic reform as the Cistercians sought out a life of manual labor and self-denial in opposition to the permissiveness of other monastic communities. By the beginning of the 13th century, the movement had spread across Europe. 1135, Gothic Architecture. The Gothic style emerged in France and began with the renovation of the Basilica of Saint-Denis by Abbot Suger. It was defined by pointed arches, flying buttresses, and ribbed vaults. The architecture is perfect for creating taller, lighter structures. This enabled the creation of magnificent cathedrals and grand churches with soaring steeples, elaborate stonework, and huge stained glass windows. Combining religious devotion and artistic innovation, the movement spread, transforming towns and cities with iconic buildings such as Notre Dame in Paris and the Cathedral of Cologne in Germany, the largest in Northern Europe. 1170 to 1180, Mishneh Torah is written. Also known as the Book of the Strong Hand, this 14-volume work on Judaism was written by the Sephardic rabbi and philosopher Moses ben Maimon. It is the only medieval work that details all of Jewish observance. The book provides a complete statement of the oral laws of Judaism, providing a comprehensive guide to its laws and ethics. 1206, Genghis Khan declared Great Khan of the Mongols. After spending most of his life uniting the Mongol tribes, Khan now went on to launch a series of military campaigns. His army slaughtered millions of people, estimates state up to as many as 80 million, in his conquest to establish the largest contiguous empire in history. By 1294, it stretched from the Sea of Japan in the east to parts of Eastern Europe in the west, into the Indian subcontinent and the Iranian plateau, and as far north as the Arctic. The conquest had long-term consequences and a lasting impact on the regions involved. 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council. Pope Innocent III ordered this convocation in Rome. The council was attended by hundreds of bishops and other church authorities to rule on questions of Christian doctrine, administration, and discipline. Some of the decisions had a profound effect on the Catholic Church going forwards and included the requirement of at least one yearly confession, the annual partaking of communion, and the treatment of Jews and heretics. The decisions made at the Fourth Lateran Council went on to shape church policy and procedures for centuries to come. 1215, the Magna Carta. The Great Charter was signed by King John of England at Runnymede near Windsor. It was drawn up by the Archbishop of Canterbury to make peace between the king and a group of rebel barons. The document is often looked at as a foundation for modern democracy, as it sets out a list of rules on how the country should be run, stating that no one is above the law, everyone is entitled to a fair trial, and people should be taxed fairly. 1258, the Siege of Baghdad. This heralded the downfall of the 500-year-old Abbasid Caliphate as the Mongol army under the command of Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, captured Baghdad. Hugul's Ilkhanate went on to rule the city, which recovered from the sacking and prospered. The Siege of Baghdad has been traditionally used as a marker for the end of the Islamic Golden Age, the ramifications of which are unknown. 1265, Suma Theologica. Thomas Aquinas was an Italian Dominican friar and priest. He was one of the most influential philosophers and theologians of the Middle Ages. In 1265, he began the Summary of Theology, a huge compendium of the main theological teachings of the Catholic Church. In 1909, the author Joseph Perrier described the treatise as, quote, "one of the classics of the history of philosophy and one of the most influential works of Western literature. It is Aquinas' most perfect work, the fruit of his mature years, in which the thought of his whole life is condensed." Meant as a guide for students, the Summa Theologica shaped the academic discussions of the Middle Ages. Aquinas died in 1274 before the entire work was finished. 1291, the Fall of Acre. When Acre fell to the Mamluk Empire, the Crusaders lost their last major stronghold in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The siege had lasted just over 8 weeks, and the victorious Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil returned to Cairo with the gate of the Church of St. Andrew, which was then used in the construction of a mosque. The Fall of Acre heralded the end of the Holy Crusades. None of any consequence were ever raised to recapture the Holy Land again. By 1291, the monarchs and nobility of Europe had other interests and enthusiasms to capture their interest. This was despite the determined efforts of the papacy to raise further crusades to retake the Holy Land. 1315–17, the Great Famine. In the spring of 1315, it began to rain heavily over much of Europe. By the spring of the following year, it was still raining. Crops failed, food prices rose. In Lorraine, France, the price of wheat went up by 320%, and people just couldn't get enough to eat. To make matters worse, cattle and sheep were practically wiped out with the onset of disease. What meat there was could not be cured because of the shortage of salt, as brine couldn't be evaporated in wet weather. There was hunger and death on a huge scale, with widespread tales of cannibalism and infanticide. The calamity affected European medievals significantly, with mass casualties, social unrest, rises in violent crime, and the spread of contagious diseases. 1320, the Divine Comedy. The Italian poet Dante Alighieri completed his epic allegorical poem in 1320. In it, he describes the author's travels through hell, inferno, purgatory, purgatorio, and heaven, paradisio, perfectly presenting the reader with a medieval worldview of the afterlife. It was Dante who first introduced the world to the concept of the 9 circles of hell as a representation of the gradual increase of sin by degrees of wickedness. Dante drew on the theology and philosophy derived from the Summa Theologica by Thomas Aquinas when writing the poem. Dante's ideas have had a huge influence on art and literature over the centuries, and the Divine Comedy is considered to be one of the greatest works in Western literature. 1325, the Mexica founded Tenochtitlan. Forced out of their previous habitat, the Mexica, or Aztecs, now formed the city of Tenochtitlan in the marshland of Lake Texcoco. A thriving culture soon developed, and the city grew and spread across a construction of artificial islands to a size of over 5 square miles to become the center of a new empire. By 1520, Tenochtitlan was home to around 400,000 people, the most important Aztec center, and Mesoamerica's largest and most powerful. It was destroyed when Hernando Cortés invaded with his Spanish conquistadors, causing the fall of the Aztec Empire. Cortés founded the Spanish capital of Mexico City on the ruins of Tenochtitlan. 1337, the 100 Years' War. What began as a feudal dispute over the Duchy of Aquitaine developed into a conflict between England and France that would continue sporadically for 116 years. It kicked off when King Edward III of England tried to claim the French throne, and the French fell into a civil conflict. The Troubles saw notable and bloody battles such as those of Agincourt and Crécy. In the end, the French were victorious. The overall defeat left England with a bitter taste and a rejection of all things French, including their language. English therefore became the official language of England in 1362. The political and financial trouble caused by the English defeat played a major role in the later Wars of the Roses. In France, their victory helped to accelerate the process of turning away from a feudal monarchy to a centralized state. 1347 to 51, the Black Death. One of the most devastating pandemics swept across Eurasia in the middle of the 14th century. Estimated to have killed as many as 200 million people, the bubonic plague, caused by a bacterium and spread by fleas, produced overwhelming social, economic, and cultural devastation. The population decline caused a shortage in the labor force and a huge increase in wages, but there was also rampant inflation. Religious fervor and fanaticism also increased. 1368, the Ming Dynasty. In China, the Ming Dynasty began ruling after the collapse of the Mongol-led Yuan Dynasty. The Ming stayed in power until the middle of the 17th century and oversaw a restoration of Confucian values and Chinese traditions. The economy thrived, the population grew, and there were significant cultural achievements in art and literature. In 1420, the Forbidden City was completed, and the third Ming Emperor relocated the capital to Beijing, which has remained China's main seat of government ever since. There were great naval expeditions, such as the voyages of Zheng He, and a successful maritime trade. Ming blue and white porcelain became a dominant export and was sought after globally. Other notable Ming achievements included the refurbishment of the Great Wall. 1378, the Western Schism. Also known as the Papal Schism, this was a split in the Catholic Church when two bishops, one residing in Rome and the other in Avignon, France, claimed to be the true pope. Later, in 1409, a third line of Pisan claimants joined the crisis. The papacy had resided in Avignon, France since 1309. Gregory XI, who was the last pope in Avignon, was persuaded to return to Rome in 1377. Following his death there, Urban VI was elected to the papacy, but a group of French cardinals rejected the election and instead claimed Clement VII to be their pope in Avignon. In 1409, the Council of Pisa declared both men to be illegitimate and elected a third, Antipope John XXIII. All the infighting caused political and religious conflict across Europe. The schism went on for almost 40 years until 1417, when the Council of Constance resolved the matter, cancelled all claims, and elected Pope Martin V as Pope in Rome. The Western Schism highlighted the problems within the Catholic Church that would later lead to reform and the Protestant Reformation. 1397, the Calmar Union. Agreed upon in Calmar, Sweden, this was a political union between the three Scandinavian kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, which at the time also included much of present-day Finland. Norway also included the overseas territories of Iceland, Greenland, the Faroe, Orkney, and Shetland Isles. The union was designed by Queen Margaret I of Denmark and was created to make Scandinavia a unified state powerful enough to resist an assault from any external threat. While political stability was achieved for a time, internal difficulties and regional differences led to an ending of the union in the early 16th century. However, the Calmar Union did help to shape the political situation in Northern Europe. 1401 Florence Baptistry Competition. It was a competition that changed the history of art. Held in Florence, the Association of Textile Merchants wanted to find an artist who could design the north door of the baptistry of San Giovanni. The theme was to be the sacrifice of Isaac. 7 prominent artists took part in the competition, but it was Lorenzo Ghiberti's innovative design that won the prize. In what has been described as the beginning of the Renaissance, Ghiberti took 21 years to complete the gilded bronze doors, consisting of 28 panels depicting the life of Christ. His attempt to reconcile biblical and classical themes marked a renewed interest in classical antiquity and the concept of humanism that would define the Renaissance. 1439 The Gutenberg Press. Johannes Gutenberg was a German blacksmith and inventor. In 1439, he invented the movable type printing press. Although movable type was in use in China, having been invented by Bai Sheng in the 11th century, Gutenberg's press worked at a much faster rate. This created an information revolution as the written word became more accessible and, more importantly, more affordable. The printing press had a huge impact on the development of the Renaissance and the Reformation. Gutenberg is thought to be one of the most influential figures in human history and is celebrated throughout the world. 1453 Siege of Constantinople again. The Ottoman leader Sultan Mehmed II conquered Constantinople after a 55-day siege and brought an end to the Byzantine Empire. This marked the end of the Roman Empire in the east, a state that had lasted for 1500 years. The Ottomans were now on the rise as a major international power. It was also a watershed moment in military history as Constantinople was overcome by cannon bombardment. Cities and castles could no longer depend upon their ramparts and walls to repel invaders now that gunpowder was on the scene. For some historians, this marked the end of the medieval period and the start of the early modern, as the fall of Constantinople affected the culture and trade of the region and drove European explorers to search out new trading routes, contributing to the age of exploration. 1455 to 1487, the Wars of the Roses. Fought between the houses of Lancaster and York for control of the English throne, the conflict resulted in the death of Richard III of York, the last English king to be killed in battle, by the forces of Lancastrian Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. Tudor was subsequently crowned King Henry VII. The Tudor dynasty produced 2 of the most important monarchs in English history, Henry VIII, who initiated the English Reformation, and his daughter Queen Elizabeth I, who presided over the Elizabethan era, often depicted as a golden age in English history. 1492, Columbus sails to the Americas. The Italian explorer was sponsored by Isabella and Ferdinand, the king and queen of a unified Spain. Columbus sailed west across the Atlantic Ocean to search for a new route to Asia. Instead, he arrived in the Caribbean in what marked the beginning of the exploration and colonization of the Americas. The voyages of Columbus created an economic transformation in global trade. It altered the course of European exploration, produced cultural exchanges and colonial empires, and ultimately reshaped the world economy. Phew, these are just some of the important events that happened during the Middle Ages. Of course, there are many more, but we picked out these 50 as having a profound influence on our history. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please let me know in the comments below if you want to see more long-form videos like this, and as always, I'll see you next week for another video. Until then, cheers!